So before we jump right into it, do me a quick favor if you would, and let me know in the comments if this short story sounds familiar to you. So I've been in and out of photography for the majority of my life. This is actually my very first camera. It's a Canon SureShot film camera. And this here is my first digital camera, which is a 6 megapixel Sony CyberShot, one of those pocket cameras. Now, both of these cameras, although totally different formats, they do share a common lens characteristic that has absolutely nothing to do with the actual focal length, and also has nothing to do with the actual aperture range of either of these lenses. But rather what they do have in common is the fact that I didn't get the opportunity to select either one of these, as these are both fixed lens cameras. And after, I guess, talking with hundreds or maybe even thousands of photographers over the years, it seems this story is highly relatable to how many photographers first got started. But eventually, the time comes when you want to upgrade your camera system to one that enables you to select multiple different lenses. And here you'll have all the decision-making power you could ever want, and you'll be faced with a choice of innumerable options as to what your first lens should be. And in this video, I'll share with you what I think the first lens is that many beginning photographers should start with. But what's perhaps more important than the actual lens itself is the reasoning as to why this particular lens. And in order to determine the why, it's necessary to understand really the defining characteristics of each of the three main categories of lenses. So to jump right into it, the first category of lenses is telephoto. You could also group into super telephoto into this group, but basically longer focal lengths. So one of the I guess, obvious qualities of a longer focal length is a very narrow field of view. And it also has a characteristic of being able to take distant objects and pull them closer to you. Those are two of the most obvious qualities of a telephoto lens. But they're great for creating the very, very simplistic photographs, very intimate scenes. So this entire scene in its totality is absolutely massive. I mean, there is stuff everywhere around the scene. But using a telephoto lens and just zooming into this one little area creates a very, very intimate and very focused composition. But it's also very simplistic, free of clutter. Another example of this is just a very, very simple photograph here. Now, I absolutely love it. I don't think simple photographs are bad. I think my style of photography is rather simplistic sometimes. But this right here is nothing fancy. You know, you have pine tree here, and putting Yosemite Falls right in the center. It's a very classic composition of this waterfall, but it's a very, very simple and very focused composition. This right here is a fantastic example of it because this is a massive valley in the Smoky Mountain National Park where just this little bit of light was kissing in this little area of tiny fog or mist. And it was just a very, very small scene in an otherwise massive area right through here. But once again, very, very focused, very, very simplistic composition. And perhaps one of my favorite aspects of a telephoto lens is that they're not condition-dependent lenses, meaning the field of view is very small. So the odds that you're going to have a portion of your image or a portion of your composition contained by the sky is not great. So if your sky is not cooperating, meaning, you know, exciting sunrise, or maybe not an exciting sunset, or maybe there's no clouds at all, no texture, no drama, nothing. It's just a bluebird sky. You can easily cut that out with the telephoto lens. And this is a good example of it right here, where the sky was very boring at this particular time. Nothing was happening, but just zooming into an area that I did find very interesting, that I did find exciting, was very, very beneficial, completely removing that area. And this is another great example of this because this is in Iceland. There was no light, there was nothing. It was just gray clouds, very even light, just zooming into a very small portion of an iceberg. And you can see that there's obviously no sky. The conditions don't really matter here, but it's a very focused composition. It's a very simplistic composition, but I absolutely love it. So those are really the main qualities of a telephoto lens that bring distant objects closer, intimate scenes, small field of view, very simplistic photographs, not condition dependent. Now, moving down the ladder, you have a mid-range lens and mid-range zoom lens, if you will. And I think this focal length is absolutely fantastic for woodland photographs. And the next examples I'm going to show you, I think, are all woodland photographs that I absolutely love. But as you can see, that field of view is starting to get a little bit wider, but it's not super wide, so you can still create those, somewhat intimate scenes, but the field of view is definitely widening. It can still be a simple composition. It can still be a focused composition. It can still have that intimate feeling, but you can see and you can feel that focal range or the field of view is starting to get a little bit wider here. But you're still able to create those somewhat intimate scenes, I should say. If this was a shot with a longer focal length, I would not have been able to get any of this foreground here, wouldn't have been able to get this rock. And I really like the way that this stone helps to tell this overall story. And this stone here actually really anchors this entire composition. If I had a longer focal length on it, it just would have been a small area of the tree, or maybe just a detailed version of it. But using that mid-range lens, I was able to create a little bit of foreground, create a little bit of background, create a little bit of depth in the overall photograph. And this right here is a great example of this next point. So one of the qualities of a telephoto lens is that they're not condition dependent. Well, a mid-range lens is starting to become more condition dependent because that field of view is starting to open up a little bit. So the odds that you're going to have an area of the sky in your photograph, or maybe an area of interesting light or interesting mist or fog, is starting to increase as that field of view begins to open up. And I've got a good example of this where beautiful fog and mist kind of raking all through here. You can tell that this background is busy, but the fog really kind of creates that diffusion factor and softens down that background so it doesn't look so busy. But what is it going to look like when that fog is gone? As you can tell, completely different. Very busy photograph. You can see all of the noise, everything behind it, and it no longer has that same kind of ethereal quality or soft diffuse and simplistic quality to it. So a mid-range zoom lens is starting to become a little bit more condition dependent because that field of view is opening up. So just to kind of recap mid-range zoom lenses, the field of view is opening up. You can still create somewhat intimate scenes. You can still create somewhat simplistic and not overly complex photographs, but that the condition dependency is starting to increase with a mid-range zoom lens. Now, moving on to a wide-angle lens, and this is what I consider to be the three main categories. Of course, you have like macro lenses and ultra-wide-angle lenses, but for the most part, you can group these things into telephoto, mid-range, and wide-angle lenses. So, wide-angle lens, one of the biggest qualities, it's a huge, very wide field of view. As you can see, there's a photograph I shared from my recent trip to Norway. This scene is absolutely massive. I don't know how wide it actually is, but it is huge, and that wide-angle lens really captured all of it here. And that can be a really cool thing because wide-angle lenses create a very immersive photograph. It feels like you can almost walk into it, which is a really, really cool quality. But I think you would agree that wide-angle lenses generally don't create the most intimate photographs. There's a lot going on here. And for me, I feel like you got to get kind of closer to a subject for it to feel a little bit more intimate. And with a wide-angle lens, a lot of times you're capturing a lot of the scene. It just doesn't quite feel as intimate. There's a lot going on here. You got this outflow of water here, waterfall, bridge, mountains, sky. This tree balances out that side. There's a lot happening. I think it's a beautiful photograph, but it definitely doesn't have an intimate quality to it. But probably one of the biggest downsides of a wide-angle lens is this right here. The fact that the field of view is so wide that it's really easy to create disjointed compositions or overly busy compositions. Now, personally, I think this image works. I really like this photograph, but it is insanely busy. There is so much stuff happening all over this photograph. But after a lot of trial and error and spending a lot of time really focused on this composition, trying to figure out exactly how can I create some kind of sense of order here, I finally came up with this, and I really do like it. But you can see what I'm saying with the amount of sky. And think about if those clouds weren't there and it was just a blue sky, it would really kind of mess with this photograph. And with a wide-angle zoom lens, if you're at this scene, you're really going to be hard-pressed to not have the sky in the photograph. So a wide-angle lens can definitely create a busy photograph. And it's a very condition-dependent lens as well. And distractions. Now, distractions are probably one of the biggest aspects, or biggest, I guess you could say, negative qualities of a wide-angle lens, especially if you're using it in a woodland scene like this right here. Because no matter what you do, if you're in the woods, you're going to be cutting off some area. There's going to be some distractions on the edges of your photograph. And you're really going to have to put a lot of work into trying to determine exactly where you're going to cut these distractions off. And once again, with that wide field of view, you really got to pay attention to everything that's capturing and work at eliminating those distracting areas. And I think that this is a great example of, just the I guess, not easy quality or the difficulty in composing a wide-angle scene. You have to think about foregrounds and midgrounds and backgrounds and how are you going to create depth. And then you throw in the fact that it's a very condition-dependent lens. There's a lot of things that you're going to have to equate for. If this sky wasn't cooperating, that would have killed this photograph. But I do like the foreground, and I like the sweeping nature, how it kind of S-curves all the way through to the mountain in the background from Iceland. But a wide-angle lens definitely takes some work. You know, it's very condition dependent. If this sky wasn't like this image wouldn't work at all. It's a very, it's such a wide field of view. You got to figure out where you're going to place all these different things in that wide field of view to make a comfortable viewing experience for the viewer. So there's a lot of things that you're going to have to figure out with a wide angle lens. So in my opinion, those are really the main characteristics. I'm sure I may have missed out a few, but those are the ones that really jump out at me when you think about telephoto lenses, mid-range lenses, and wide angle lenses. Now, as far as the lens that I think a beginner should start with, it's this right here. It's a wide angle zoom lens. This 16 to 35 is something that I would recommend, something in that focal range. I think is a great place to start. Now that might sound kind of weird because it feels like we just kind of poo-pooed wide angle lenses, but I think that with that wide field of view, you're really gonna have to put some work in. And I've talked about this before, that when I first got started in photography, I spent a lot of time focused on gear, like a lot of photographers do when they're first getting started, when the latest and greatest this, latest and greatest that. But it wasn't until I started to focus on composition that my photography really started to improve. So I think the sooner that a beginning photographer, or even if you're in your first few years of photography, the sooner you put a ton of emphasis on improving your photography, that is going to be the time when you see the greatest level of improvement. And I think a wide angle lens, grab it again, is a fantastic tool for teaching better composition, because that field of view is so wide and you're going to have to deal with a lot of things that are going to be in your scene. You're going to have to figure out what's the most pleasing way to arrange those things. Should I get high? Should I get low? Left? Right? How am I going to eliminate distractions? What if the sky isn't super exciting? How am I going to create depth? What's my foreground? What's my midground? What's my background? There's a lot going on. And I think the sooner you start to embrace a wider focal length, the quicker you will start to improve your own photography from a compositional perspective. And I think that this is a great example right here of that field of view shift. So this is a wide angle photograph, and I put on the next image is a longer focal length, just zoomed into this area right here, which is that right there. And you can see how that field of view just absolutely shrunk to that right there. We were here, super wide. Next image, all the way to here. And that field of view, that is absolutely imperative. And that really is something that's extremely important when you're thinking about telephoto lenses, mid-range lenses, and wide angle lenses, is that field of view. So in summary, if you are someone who is looking to get into photography, or you've been into it for a little while and you're looking to go out and purchase your first lens, I would definitely recommend trying to find a wider focal length zoom lens. I wouldn't really, I mean, I shouldn't say this, but because you might like a prime lens, maybe. I've used many prime lenses, and it used to be, the thought track was a prime lens was a little bit cheaper and sharper than a zoom lens. Well, from my experience, nowadays zoom lenses are insanely sharp, and I don't see prime lenses being much cheaper. If anything, I feel like prime lenses are more expensive than zoom lenses now. So I think the flexibility that a zoom lens provides is invaluable. So I would definitely go for zoom lenses, but a good wide angle zoom lens, I wouldn't really worry much about the specific aperture when you're first getting going. You're more than likely going to be shooting at f8 and above anyway for landscape photography, so I wouldn't worry about trying to get the fastest lens, f4 or f2.8. I think the focal length is by far the most important thing when you're first getting going. So wide angle lens, that is my choice. That's what I would recommend that somebody start with. Kind of like ripping off a Band-Aid. Rip off that Band-Aid and start using that wide angle lens. You'll trip up a lot, you'll make a lot of mistakes, but I think that you will improve your composition at a much faster rate, as opposed to if you just started with a telephoto lens or something like that. So if you have any questions, I feel like I was talking really quick in this video. I think I drank too much coffee. More than likely that is exactly what it was. So let me slow it down here. So if you have any questions about anything related to lenses or beginning photography or anything covered in this week's video, please leave those in the comment section below, and I will do my best to get back in touch with you as soon as possible. And if you did enjoy this week's video, if you could give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed already. And as always, I really do appreciate you checking out this week's video, and I will see you all next Wednesday. Bye.